Hi. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about one of the uses that scholars and researchers and scientists are putting video games to. And like Jim, I'm going to take the liberty to speculate a little bit into the future and ask some questions about ways that games can help us understand a range of human behavior. And part of this is because we need to understand more than we can, especially given the cost of the kinds of tools that we can use studying folks wandering around cities and towns and schools. I want to give you an example. For some time now, the Center of Disease Control in the US has been helping us prepare for a very serious potentiality, maybe even eventuality, a really serious threat, actually, that if it happened would completely change our relationship with the world, with each other, devastate families, towns, complete lives, our entire civilization, really, actually, would be completely changed. And I'm not exaggerating here. This is a threat that the CDC has recognized and has started to develop some awareness and training so that people can understand what they need to do and what would happen. By examining and analyzing their data on epidemics and disease vectors and the impact of changing living circumstances and these kinds of things, they have come to acknowledge that the world's populations need to know about what to do with this threat. Yes, I'm talking about the zombie apocalypse. I'm not kidding. This is real. The CDC is helping us understand what we do with the zombie apocalypse. And thank goodness they are. I mean, we need to be prepared, right? We need to know what to do and what will happen in the event. The problem is it's actually really hard to prepare for the zombie apocalypse. We just don't know enough about how people will react. We can analyze diseases and we can know how they spread, but zombies are different, you know. They walk around, they moan, they groan. There's all these kinds of elements to it that especially bring in this really, really impossible to truly predict element of human behavior. And so to create things like a zombie attack survival kit, we need to know what kinds of interactions and actions and behaviors people might have to, the zombie apocalypse. Well, I'm here to tell you that learning about how people might react to the zombie apocalypse is actually getting closer and closer in sight, so there is some hope. For example, a few years ago, the massively multiplayer game World of Warcraft had an event, a world event, that infected players with the zombie plague. At that point, there was no coordination with the CDC, but later, actually, I kid you not, there was quite a lot of interest in how those diseases spread as they moved from avatar to avatar, and the world of Warcraft was devastated. Cities, towns overrun with skeletons, rotting bodies, spewing their zombie stuff all over the place, attacking and killing all the other players. It was terrible. Few little survivors huddling in the mountains trying to escape the plague. Well, it was kind of useful to look at how people reacted, what kinds of movement and spread, how long it took, how many people a certain amount of disease required to then spread into the next population center, how things traveled across these very empty expanses between major cities, how they crossed different groups. And in all seriousness, events like these are sparking the imagination of scientists and scholars who are trying to understand the behaviors and reactions to things that we can't quite test in the real world, like zombie infections. And they're finding that games are a place where we can learn a whole lot about human behavior and behavior that extends out into meat space, zombie rotting meat space or not. My research over the last couple of years has taken a stab, so to speak, at contributing to the understanding of the relationships between how people interact in virtual spaces and their offline actions and interactions, who they are and the kinds of things that they do. The idea is that we watch people do things in virtual worlds, we can learn something about who they are offline or outside of those worlds, and we can ask them to do and interact in ways that may not be possible, and we can record them in ways that may not be possible in offline spaces. So, in a project that I've been working on for the last couple of years, we have created a setup where we wanted to watch people do stuff, interact with each other, face challenges, solve problems, lead a group, follow a leader, etc. And what we realized in the early planning stages was that the very best way to do this was through a game. I am going to show you a little, there it is. Taste of that game. Jim, how do I? Okay. Mac and I don't get along. Can I? Big enough?
Yes, control.
Someone took that diamond right off our daughter's neck.
Who dares disturb my rest?
Both Colonel Herncastle and Godfrey Aberwhite were a little too interested in that diamond.
I had to fix the watch, but why did he give it to me?
I will see you when or if the case is solved.
You must seek out the madness and revenge.
How do I get back to mine? It's not going to start from the beginning? Great. So, of course, using games to find out what people do is nothing new. That's a picture of folks playing Go, ancient Chinese war simulation game, and the Egyptian game Senet from about 3100 BCE, and, of course, chess, which has been around in its current formation for about 15 years. Gladiator games of ancient Rome, and the Aztec game of Ulama or Tlachtli, both of which were used as proxies for warfare. And in fact, Spanish colonials put in their records that in some cases the Aztecs would challenge their enemies to a game of Ulama and often behead the loser, instead of actually having full-out war declared. And so, moving forward in time, we see a continuation of thinking about games as a place to learn, to have simulations and training. And indeed, the US military uses simulations like this all the time. They've been doing this for decades and decades and decades. These are some examples of the virtual versions of such things, but of course, war games out in the field have been used for hundreds of years. Learning how to do specific skills, like flying an airplane or jumping out of one, or as a recruitment tool, are part of thinking about games as being able to be integrated into a range of other types of goals and other types of needs that have to do with getting human beings to behave in different ways, to interact with each other in different ways, to interact with different tools and spaces in different ways. And of course, as folks use these kinds of games to train and simulate, they're not just teaching people skills, but they're also looking at what people do during that training and learning more about how people react and interact in these environments. So when we have people go into these games, we can learn something about how they might react if their parachute fails. Another event that has recently happened and shattered folks in the massively multiplayer game World of Warcraft is appropriately enough called The Shattering. As part of an expansion, the creators of WoW, World of Warcraft, WoW, Blizzard, basically destroyed the world via a very powerful dragon. They took cities and devastated them. They flooded places, put others on fire. And players, knowing this was coming, and then experiencing the incredible, complete change to the landscapes they had been in since 2004, this happened last year, by the way, was a very interesting experience for us as researchers. And a project that I'm working on with a few folks right now is applying some of the models and ideas from crisis and environmental communication and environmental risk management and crisis management to think about whether or not how people react to this virtual world being shattered and changed has parallels in how people react to, say, floods or fires in their own cities. We're really hopeful about what this can do because we have also been doing research as a field in what happens to people's brains when they experience things like this, when they experience fear on the screen, fear of something on the screen versus fear of something in front of them. And we found that actually, yeah, the brain reacts in really similar ways. People have been looking at this in reactions to, in people's reactions to movies. They've been looking at it in people's reactions to experiencing virtual worlds and playing video games. Basically, the same areas of your brain are lighting up when you're in danger in World of Warcraft, about to be smacked by the giant dragon, as when you're in danger walking down the street from somebody about to hit you. And the level of brain activity, things like visual perception, attentional demands, mental effort, have been examined in a wide range of experiences, both positive and threatening, and found that people are able to pay more attention in many cases in virtual spaces, but actually takes less mental effort, which is really good news for folks trying to use these spaces for education and training. So thinking about how we can either introduce specific types of situations in these spaces or examine how people interact in these different kinds of spaces has generated research across the board from psychologists and anthropologists, communication scholars like me. The project from the video that I showed you at the beginning of this talk is a federally funded project where we ask groups of people to take a survey and then come into the virtual world Second Life and into a small island that we built. You saw the video showing you around that island. We asked them to interact with NPCs as well as some of us as researcher avatars and solve a murder mystery. And we record everything they do, their chat, their movements, which way they're facing, whether or not they do avatar gestures, what their avatar looks like. And then we examine the relationship between their answers on those surveys about how much propensity they have toward being a leader or whether or not they're a social conformist, what their gender is, what their age is, what their education level is, and the stuff that they do during this game. We have them accompanied by a robot to keep track and help them move through the game. And then we analyze these different components and different variables of behavior, these patterns, to see whether or not we can actually predict the people who do this thing or that thing are or are not male or female, high or low education. I am going to show you some of our results from that research, the analysis of gender. Now, is that going? There. Okay. Gender in spaces like Second Life usually actually are very strongly associated with avatar gender. But there are other spaces in which this is not the case, like there might not be a gender, or World of Warcraft where people regularly use genders other than the one that is their own. So this little analysis is trying to understand those relationships. kinds of patterns are very specific to the spaces that you see, that you analyze them in. And so you're going to get a really different set of reactions and interactions in different types of spaces to certain things. But one of the things about work like this that's really helpful is then we can think about other kinds of analyses and perform this kind of analysis in other games in order to be able to start to compare and identify some of the patterns that we see across these spaces. And indeed, researchers are beginning to do this all over the place. They're looking at people's use of social media to try to understand how their Twitter feeds and their Facebook posts are related to who they are, what kinds of people do what kinds of things. They're looking at things like the 80 million players of Farmville and how they interact with each other and how those networks are formed. More specific types of experiments have been run in spaces like Second Life, looking at how people interact with different objects or different types of avatars that they're given. And of course, the social impact of different kinds of behaviors in spaces like World of Warcraft. In the research that we are doing, what we're really focusing on is being able to make those predictions from behavior in these virtual worlds to answers on surveys that ostensibly represent who they are more generally. But understanding how people interact and act with these worlds in specific, how they are in the games themselves, is also really important to us. Because we can understand things about the way the brain works and how those parallels fit together, how we know that fear, when evoked offline, looks the same in the brain as fear evoked online, then we can understand something different about fear, whether it's fear of a dragon or fear of a snake slithering in front of you. Looking at behavior in games has quite a lot of advantages. And partly this is because when people interact and act in virtual games, they are acting and interacting in real ways. This is not fake fear. This is not virtual fear. This is not a virtual set of friendships or interactions or conversations. And in these spaces, people, they get scared, they get excited, they fight, they fall in love. Maybe it's a better place to go for dating. These kinds of behaviors are things that scientists, social scientists have been fascinated with for a very long time. And games give us ways to understand these things that can be actually better than examining them in physical space, in part because first and foremost, we can record what people do. We can log every movement. We can record their chat. We can record those actions. And then we can analyze them in these massive databases that are swimming around on our computers. You can imagine that following folks around all day with video cameras and little location markers and recorders, well, it's a little harder than you might think. The other advantage is that we can look at people over time. We can get a sense of their longitudinal interaction with these things. We don't need to separate out that one day that we actually do follow them around. And these spaces are a lot more than just text. They are completely full of different types of visual objects. You design a self. There are a lot of different kinds of decisions that are made as part of interacting in that space that can teach us different types of things. And a decent amount of research has shown that things like personality characteristics, the way that we measure them in psychology labs, hold true in virtual spaces as well. We're extending this research so that we can take advantage of some of those. We're currently collecting data in the World of Warcraft, doing a very similar kind of project as I showed you for the Second Life, and I'm going to take advantage of the fact that we have extra time to show you yet another video. This is the recruitment video for the World of Warcraft study. I hope. Come on, you can do it. There we go.
Fight terrible foes.
Hold on. Why is it? Jim, help. It didn't start at the beginning. Help. It's not at the beginning.
You have to drag that little icon there.
There we go.
Something's rotten in the state of Dalaran. No, it's not this guy. Dark forces are staging a vicious mutiny that threatens to destroy the city. The Picaroon Protectorate has tried to stop this vile plot, but its greatest warriors have failed. In a desperate move, the Protectorate is seeking a band of newly minted heroes to uncover who these marauders are, what they're doing, and how to stop them. Join a motley crew of adventurers. Explore the shady edges of Dalaran. Fight terrible foes. And do whatever dirty deeds are required.
Huh? Dirty deeds? Woohoo!
The fate of Dalaran rests with me.
Go to scribes.colostate.edu for more information and to sign up to play. If you're selected, you'll get a 30-day game card for completing the study.
All right. Where am I? There we go. There are disadvantages, of course, to using games to examine how people act and interact. Partly because everything we do in virtual worlds is, well, not really exactly the same as offline, from how we look to the kinds of monsters that we face and problems that we're trying to solve. It's not so common, for example, for people to be having to figure out how to deal with a giant sentient robot. And so, yes, it does mean that you are different in these virtual worlds, in these virtual spaces, than you are in other spaces. They are contextually dependent. We change how we behave in those spaces. The work of Nick Yee shows us that, in fact, we change how we behave when we're given a different kind of avatar. People who are taller behave with more self-confidence. People whose avatars are more attractive are more likely to tell other people intimate things about themselves and have higher self-disclosure. But in spite of these things, there are a lot of different things that do carry through. And from the extensive research in this area, we are learning more and more about what can really help us understand, say, possible reactions to the zombie apocalypse. As we move forward with game technologies, obviously research has to keep up. And so as we start to have things that connect to our heads or cover our faces and make these experiences even more and more immersive, become three-dimensional, or interact with the world, as some of the technologies that Jim was showing you. This is a set of screenshots from the Google Glasses, which have a similar kind of scanning of your environment and then information that you can call up that you wear as glasses. And they don't look like the giant head covering thing either. And so as we extend into these different types of technologies and different types of interactions, we extend our research as well as our understanding of people's actions and interactions. These kinds of spaces let us learn about things that we have a terribly difficult time learning about. As a matter of fact, the Department of Defense has just put out a call for a group to create a virtual world simulator where a bunch of people are supposed to go and interact in a virtual world on a regular basis, and then random events will be held, random trials with statistically careful setups of experimentation procedures in order to find out, how people react to the zombies or the asteroid or those kinds of things in terms of their social networks, in terms of their crisis response, in terms of their interactions with each other. And so as we gain more and more tools to understand how people react, who they are, and what they need, looks like games are probably going to be front and center of knowing more about that information. Thank you.